Good night. It is about 10 minutes past 10 p.m. Still okay for me to read. I thank God that I'm fine. I've had a great day indoors. I've just spent a little while with my neighbour who's not as fit as me. Bless her. Please pray for her. Her name's Rosie. She's having difficulty walking at the moment. So certain things are wrong. I'm going to be continuing with this. I try and do a part of a book, a chapter or so, every now and then when I've got a book on the go. I can't commit myself every day to do the book. Besides, a book like this is not like a novel where you want to keep going. It's a book where you need to take time and you need to be prayerful and understanding, and we're dealing with spiritual here. Serious spiritual. So it's not, you can't read it like an ordinary book that one sits back and relaxes and read. It's not that kind of book. Those that are following it, it's not everybody's cup of tea, but it's important. So we're on chapter 13. I'm going to get straight into it. It's a pastoral approach, and the words of Father Gabriele Amorth says, and Father Candido, AMANTINI, Exorcist, we can do only our best, and then we must leave the final decision up to God. Father Candido AMANTINI, as quoted in An Exorcist, tells his story by Father Gabriele Amorth. I will not be giving you details of I'll tell you what page it'll end on. It begins on page 161 and it'll be about 10 pages possibly, which is not a lot of pages. It's very short, I think. I'll just tell you in a moment where it ends. It ends on 171. So that's cool. I'll just say one prayer or two. Angel of God, my guardian dear, to whom his love commits me here, ever this night be at my side, to light and guard, to rule and guide. Amen. And Holy Michael the Archangel, defend me in this day of battle. Be my safeguard against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, I humbly pray. And do thou, Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, thrust down to hell Satan and all the wicked evil spirits who wander through the world for the ruin of souls. Amen. So we're beginning again. We're following Father Gary. Those who are following understand that he's learning to be an exorcist, or what it means. It doesn't mean that even though he does the training that he's actually going to. We'll see what happens. By February, Father Gary, he's in Italy by the way, and he's from America. By February, Father Gary had settled into a comfortable routine. After morning mass, he would usually do some reading, either up in his room or in the NAC library. Then in the evenings, on Monday through Thursday, he would see exorcisms at San Lorenzo until dinner. On Thursday morning, he would see exorcisms. He would head out to the Regina Apostolorum, and then in the afternoon over to his class on the history of spirituality at the Angelicum. About this time, an American exorcist, and I'm sure you've all heard him on YouTube, Father Vince Lampert, from the Diocese of Indianapolis, got in touch. in Rome to participate in the continuing education program at the NAC. Father Vince had recently been nominated Exorcist and figured that it would be a good idea to participate in a few exorcisms while he was in town. Like Father Gary, when his Archbishop had appointed him exorcist, he had told him that he had no idea what he was asking him to do. A slender, thoughtful man, whose unedited bluntness comes off as a bit gruff, Father Vince is nonetheless very personable and quick to laugh at a good joke. Meeting one night for dinner in a trattoria near St. Peter's, the two priests immediately hit it off. As they got to know each other, Father Vince filled Father Gary in about the circumstances that led to his nomination and his concern, like most American exorcists, that he had no training and was not sure where he should begin. Father Gary, for his part, was candid about his own background. He had checked with Father Carmenet about bringing Father Vince along, but he wanted to prepare him, remembering his own feelings of disappointment, alternating with shock. As he listened, Father Vince's favourable impression of Father Gary grew. This was not a priest that was out to bag demons and make a name for himself, but somebody who levelled with him and told him that some of the victims' reactions were downright odd. The two decided they would meet the following Monday at the Casa first, and then together go to San Lorenzo on the bus. Like any novice, Father Gary included Father Vince had been growing more and more anxious about what he might see in his first exorcism. He had spent the previous day readying himself in the only way he knew how, going to confession and spending extra time in prayer. He had purposefully tried to steer clear of films like The Exorcism of Emily Rose. Well done. Some priests at the NAC had watched it one night because he did not want to be prejudiced. Before he left the NAC that afternoon, he told a few fellow priests where he was going. They replied that they would pray for him. Well done. And pray for the victims. On the bus, his apprehension grew. Father Gary filled him in on the protocol and what he might expect to see, displaying a demeanour that helped calm his nerves. When they arrived at San Lorenzo, the usual crowd had already gathered in the courtyard, and as they waited, Father Gary gave Father Vince what little history he could on the various people. After the first night, the two stopped to have a coffee and decompress. That night had been a particularly violent one. A woman in her early 40s, with sharp, attractive features and shoulder-length black hair, had shaken so violently that Father Vince had seen her levitate 5 inches off the chair, at which point Father Carmine had simply pushed her back down with the palm of his hand. Father Gary, who was momentarily engrossed in the ritual book at the time, had missed it. Father Vince had several questions, as he was wont to do. Father Carmine had pinched the bridge of the woman's nose, which Father Vince found strange. Father Gary chuckled, telling him that he had had the same question himself. Father Carmine would later explain that he pinched the nose because the demon enters through the person's senses. Both Gary and Father Vince, thinking ahead to the day when the fate of a person's spiritual well-being would rest in their hands, were keen to learn practical tips, since the ritual is imprecise, on how an exorcism should be performed. Their chief concerns were avoiding mistakes. Father Gary, for one, had read that if the exorcist went about it wrong, he could actually open himself up spiritually to an attack. One author had even gone so far as to suggest that if the exorcist touched the person during an exorcism, the demon could enter into him. Father Carmine scoffed at this. Absolutely not. It is not a disease, he would later say. However, there were dangers. Father Carmine was adamant about not engaging the demon. Whenever the demon talks, you should never listen to him. You should never ask questions to the demon in order to know something hidden. This is a very serious mistake. A priest is not to ask the demon anything that you do not already know the answer to. For instance, why did you try to put yourself above God when you know He is all-powerful? Never ask questions so that the demon could be considered a source of information. Never. First of all, because he is a liar, and so what he says can very well be a lie. And secondly, because you cannot give him the honor of being your source of information. The ritual does permit the exorcist to ask the demon his name, which in the ancient Hebrew tradition is believed to give one a kind of power over another. Also evidenced by the ancient practice that prohibited writing or pronouncing the name of God. The foundation of asking for the demon's name comes from the Bible, where Jesus asked the name of the Gerasene demoniac, Mark 5:9. Early exorcists considered it worthy and codified it in the old 1614 Roman ritual, which allows the exorcist to ask the number and name of the spirits inhabiting the person. the time when they entered into him, and the cause. One of the first things that he struggles to avoid is to confess his name, because to do so is some sort of half defeat for him, says Father Amorth. A demon's name delineates the type of spirit it may be. Sometimes the names are purely functional, such as anger or lust. At other times, they are recognizable names from the Bible, like Beelzebub or Asmodeus. Even exorcists admit there is a lot of mystery to it. For instance, if the demon Asmodeus is present in 2 or more people that an exorcist sees, actually it is more than that. Why does not the demon recognize the exorcist? Should he not be able to say to the exorcist, "Hi, remember me? We met this morning"? In actuality, sometimes it does happen that an exorcist will pray over a person, even in another part of the world, and have the demons say, "We fought each other 5 years ago in Jerusalem," referring to an exorcism that the victim knows nothing about. However, this is rare, and the average exorcist, especially in Italy, may see Asmodeus 3 times in the same week, without so much as a "here we go again." But according to one Italian exorcist, the actual name is not that important. It may signify the army of that particular evil spirit. In other words, a demon saying Asmodeus is like a World War II American GI saying, "I am a Marine," or "I am under Eisenhower." All that matters is that they give you a name, any name, so long as they respond to it, says the exorcist. For this reason, many exorcists actually prefer not to talk to the demon at all. Father Dermine, for example, does not even ask for the name. I do not ask anything, because I do not believe them. I know this may sound disappointing, but demons are such big liars that I just continue with the prayer, almost as if they were not there. It can also happen, that a demon will sometimes give a person's name, such as Adam. A great debate exists among exorcists about whether or not the soul of a deceased person can cause a possession. The more theologically inclined exorcists say no. When a person dies, the soul goes straight to heaven, hell, or purgatory, while those who have spent some time in places like Africa, where the belief is widespread, say yes, it is possible. Father Nanny once prayed over a person who claimed to be the soul of a dead mafia boss. After months of refusing to give any other name, Father Nanny did a little checking and discovered that the person in question never existed. On this occasion, the demon finally relented and confessed that he had been trying to fool the exorcist all along. In addition to the moments when Father Carmine was able to answer a few of their questions, Father Gary and Father Vince made it a habit to have a coffee or try to grab a bite afterward. Through Father Gary's knowledge of the personal histories of the victims and Father Vince's understanding of Italian, since he was fluent in Spanish, he could make out more Italian than Father Gary could. The two would compare notes. During one of their late-night repasts, Father Gary explained to Father Vince something that had taken him weeks to figure out: why Father Carmine touched people on certain parts of their body with the crucifix. He was searching for the points that had been hit by a curse. People will often be dedicated in certain rituals, and cursed objects will be placed on the back of their neck. They also discussed actions they felt would not fly in the States, like Father Carmine slapping people at the end of the exorcism. They talked at length about the fact that the majority of bishops in America knew little about the reality of exorcism. Both agreed that bishops needed to be better informed. As he continued to participate in exorcisms, Father Gary came to realize that while they could be grueling affairs, perhaps the most arduous aspect was the endless repetition, the prayers, and many of the actions. Father Carmine ran San Lorenzo as though it were an outpatient clinic. He would pray over people for 15 to 20 minutes, and then after scheduling a follow-up appointment, they would go about their day. From talking to Father Daniel, he knew that many of the other exorcists in Rome had similar approaches. Well, it seems like they're busier in Rome than anywhere else in the world. Later, Father Gary would discover that each exorcist has his own system, in part because almost all had other duties to perform besides being an exorcist. Father Carmine, for example, was the superior at San Lorenzo and was busy with running the day-to-day operations of the basilica and parish, which meant he could schedule people only 3 to 4 days a week, usually in the evenings. So Father Carmine tended to lump the more severe cases on certain days and see fewer of them, perhaps 5 rather than 10. However, people also showed up unannounced, looking for a quick blessing. One day, a trash collector parked her miniature sanitation truck outside in the courtyard, stomped in wearing her bright green reflective striped uniform, and asked the assembled throng whether Father Carmine was taking walk-in visits. As it turned out, he was not. Then Father Gary considered the more entrenched cases, such as Sister Janica. The second time he had seen her, she seemed worse than before. On top of that, he reminded himself that she had been coming to Father Carmine for 9 years. Did not the prayers of exorcism work? People, Father Gary realized, are under a huge misapprehension that exorcism is a one-shot deal, that once an exorcist begins the ritual, it is a fight to the finish that can last for days on end, until only one is left standing. An American exorcist in Scranton, Pennsylvania, coined the phrase drive-through exorcisms to describe this one and done approach that the media and Hollywood films have made popular. Not surprisingly, this misconception is held by many who visit exorcists, most of whom go looking for a quick fix. Well, they need to look at how long it took them to get in the situation that they got in, and it was going to take longer to get out of it. People do not understand what we do, says Father Gramolazzo. People come to see us expecting to be healed right away. They think, I have a headache because of the demon. My job is not going well because of the demon. People are not properly informed. Instead, as Father Gramolazzo explained, exorcism is more akin to a journey, with the exorcist acting as a kind of spiritual director, helping the victim to rediscover the grace of God through prayer and the sacraments. This is one of the reasons why exorcists believe God allows people to become possessed in the first place. This message is extremely important, insists Father Gramolazzo. This is why it takes so long for people to become liberated. It is a journey of faith for the person, the family, and for the parish. Getting people to see it this way is not always easy for the exorcist. Half the battle is to change their whole purpose so they do not see it in the light of getting rid of a problem, but see it in the light of being more fully converted or being converted at all. Says English exorcist Father Jeremy Davis. Because he's a very wise exorcist, and he knows that unless the sufferer participates and changes completely, spiritually, and from there become a new self, a new creation in Christ, then exorcism without cooperation and without change is not possible for everyone. That is the whole aim. It is what I'm always telling people week by week, and that is the most important thing. The exorcism is secondary to that, so they need to change according to Father Jeremy Davis. They need to change. It takes time to change, and you shouldn't be looking at the time. You should be looking at how you make progress with your walk with Jesus Christ, who is saving your soul. Simply put the prayers of the exorcism weaken the power that the demon has over the person. The healing, however, cannot happen without the full participation of the individual victims of possession are exhorted to go to weekly confession, to recite the rosary daily, and above all, to receive the Eucharist. I always say that the exorcism is 10% of the cure. The remaining 90% is the responsibility of the individual. What does this mean? It means that there is a need for much prayer, frequent reception of the sacraments, living a life according to the gospel, using sacramentals, exorcised water, oil and salt, writes Father Amorth. I have people that I have been exorcising for 20 years, says Father Amorth. Saint Alfonso de Liguria says a very exact phrase. You do not always get to the liberation, you always get to some kind of relief. This means that those people who in the past used to throw themselves on the floor just for a blessing, screaming and yelling after years of exorcisms, are calm. They can live their professional life and their careers, but every once in a while they feel a little disturbance, and so they come. People who in the past used to come every day or once a week, after a few years of exorcism, they may come once every 2 months or every 6 months. What I mean is that they have a progressive improvement. On the 9th of February, Father Gary climbed up the beige marble stairs and into the classroom at Regina Apostolorum for the last time. While the second half of the course had not matched the quality of the first half in his mind, he was definitely looking forward to this last lecture. A round-table discussion led by 3 exorcists, Father Barmonti, Father Nanni, Father Amorth, and a 4th priest, Father Alberto, who ran a spiritual listening centre called the Centro Ascolto. Bringing in the exorcists to talk about their ministries was a compromise for the organisers. Originally, they had contacted the International Association of Exorcists, IAE, and asked for an exorcist to actually, they must be mad, perform an exorcism in the classroom. That's definitely a no-no. Father Gramolazzo had told them, however, that while the IAE thought the course was a good idea, exorcism was not a spectator sport. Putting a victim on the spot like that would only add to their suffering and cheapen the whole affair. And nobody can tell in advance how an exorcism is going to proceed or what is going to happen. It's not a planned thing. It happens spiritually and it can be surprising. Father Gary was very impressed by the 3 exorcists as they filed into the classroom. The trio appearing together at a lecture was akin to an all-star lineup addressing a group of little leaguers, like Father Bermonti. Father Amorth wore a long black cassock that lent him an air of piety. bald and wearing glasses at 80 years old. He walked in with a slight stoop and took his time climbing the 3 steps that led up to the podium. He was hardly the larger-than-life figure that the media portrayed him to be, and instead exuded a more jovial and avuncular quality. Thankfully, despite the presence of such luminaries, the media was not obtrusive. After opening prayers, Father Amorth spoke for 45 minutes in a gravelly yet steady voice, his eyes fixed on a corner of the room. The theme was familiar to those who followed his public appearances and read his numerous books. Exorcism goes to the heart of what it means to be a Christian and is something that every priest should take more seriously. This went double, of course, for the bishops whose job it was to appoint exorcists. In interviews, Father Amorth had even gone so far as to say that any bishop who does not appoint an exorcist is committing a mortal sin. 15 minutes into the lecture, the little voice in Father Gary's ear suddenly went silent, as his translator mysteriously went missing. Annoyed, but not necessarily surprised, Father Gary spent the next 30 minutes straining to piece together the remainder of Father Amorth's talk. His Italian was much better than it had been on the first day of the course, but he still struggled. At the break, he went back to find out what was going on, wondering if this great opportunity was going to be squandered as well. As it turned out, the first translator had tracked down a young seminarian to replace him, and Father Gary was spared from having to scour the halls. After the break, Father Nanny spoke for half an hour about the crucial role of cooperation between the exorcist and his bishop, ensuring that only officially appointed exorcists performed the ritual. In other words, just because someone had taken the course did not mean that he could begin praying over people on his own. Since Father Gary was an official exorcist, this was a moot point, though it did remind him that he would need to work closely with his bishop once he got back. Father Bermonti then discussed the importance of an exorcist having a team approach, stressing the need to have a close working relationship with a therapist or a psychologist and other prayer people who are able to pray in these situations. As he listened, Father Gary was struck again by the fact that Father Carmine did not have such colleagues. Most victims brought a companion, but still, on certain occasions, Father Carmine would have been all alone but for Father Gary, something Father Gary vowed he would never do, if only just for legal considerations. For Father Gary, Father Alberto, who ran the Centro Ascolto, proved to be the most engaging speaker. The listening centre was basically a spiritual centre, staffed by 2 priests, 2 nuns, that's what you need, the nuns there helping, a therapist, and an attached prayer group, which is a good idea. It was a place for people with spiritual or psychological problems that they attributed to spiritual issues. The concept was similar to that in a book Father Gary had bought, Stumbling Blocks or Stepping Stones, Spiritual Answers to Psychological Questions by Benedict, this is a wonderful priest, Benedict J. Grolsk. He had the most amazing funeral ever, and I watched it. He had people from every part of every spiritual faith there, because he was such a very special Christian. It was a wonderful funeral. Father Gary was inspired by Father Alberto's emphasis on the continual need for people to practice the sacraments, especially confession, and to bring prayer back into their lives, which he said people were filling with a lot of other activities. And while not necessarily terrible, these distractions, as Father Alberto put it, were still exposing people to the wrong kinds of influences. First and foremost, he wanted to create venues where people could pray. Well, we have churches. He would set up a permanent chapel inside the Basilica of Saint Anastasia for Eucharistic adoration, a Catholic tradition of meditating in front of the exposed Blessed Sacrament. Of course, Eucharistic adoration was not novel, but Father Gary liked the idea of people needing more quiet time with God. He also appreciated Father Alberto's intention of getting back to the traditions of the Church. These approaches would also benefit him as an exorcist. While it might be hard to talk to people about demons, he could certainly tell them about the benefits of praying, and he could be practicing preventive medicine, as Father Kevin Joyce recommended. After Father Alberto finished, Father Gary was delighted that there was an entire hour just for questions and answers. The session was so absorbing, he could have sat there listening for much longer. Father Amorth's response to one question made Father Gary chuckle. Everybody who is considering doing this needs to be apprenticed, knowing there are 185 dioceses to the United States alone, which meant that many exorcists would have to be trained and apprenticed. It was impossible for him to conceive that 6 guys who are over here breaking their backs could all of a sudden tutor 185 priests. But if they did not, who would? Father Gary left that final day of the course feeling reinvigorated about his calling as an exorcist. Not only had the course given him the grounding he needed, but it had reinforced his desire to help people. He could see now that rather than just being on the fringe, there was also a strong pastoral element to exorcism. A great deal more. I'm wondering how far they'll go into that part of it. So we've now finished the pastoral approach of the rite, and the next chapter will be chapter 14, and the title is, I'm not going to read it all now, just the headlines. Windows to the Soul. And the quote is from St. Augustine Confessions, which I hope you've read. The commander triumphs in victory, yet he could not have conquered if he had not fought, and the greater the peril of the battle, the more the joy of the triumph. So that's going to be a very interesting chapter. It's going to be from page 174 up to, let me see how many pages, 174 to 189. So that'll be the next one. That was chapter 13, so the next one's chapter 14. Well, there's only about 20 chapters, so we're getting through this okay. God bless you all. Thank you so much for listening. I'm sending you God's peace in abundance, and may you always be happy and joyful in the Lord. And you don't have to worry about this, but it's good to know, and we should pray for the priests, those who are exorcists or those who want to be, and for priests anyway, and also for the people who are troubled spiritually who do need this service. And it's very rare for somebody to be possessed, but many have spiritual attacks from demons, and they're the ones who we should pray for to be helped and led deeper into a Christian faith. God bless you all. Thank you.